The morning sun breaks over the Pacific, turning the ocean into liquid gold. But for the American pilots circling above the USS Lexington, beauty is the last thing on their minds. Their eyes scan the horizon, searching for the shadow that has haunted them for months, the silhouette of death itself. Then they see it. A formation of Japanese Zeros cutting through the sky like silver knives. Light, fast, impossibly agile. The American F-4F Wildcats bank hard, trying to gain altitude, but it's already too late. The Zeros dance around them, their 20mm cannons spitting fire. One by one, American planes begin to fall, trailing smoke and flame into the endless blue below. This is 1942. The Zero is not just a fighter plane, it's a nightmare made of aluminum and fury. For nearly 2 years, it has ruled the skies over the Pacific with an iron fist, destroying everything that dares challenge it. American pilots whisper its name with a mixture of fear and respect. Many never get the chance to whisper it twice. But what the Japanese don't know, what they can't possibly imagine, is that their reign of terror is about to end. Because somewhere in the shadows of American engineering, a monster is being born. A brute, a killer, a machine designed for one purpose only: to hunt the hunter. If you love stories of ingenuity born from desperation, hit subscribe, because what comes next changed the course of history. To understand how America found itself on the edge of annihilation in the Pacific, we need to rewind to December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor, the surprise attack that shattered American confidence and thrust the United States into a war it wasn't prepared to fight. In a single morning, the Japanese Imperial Navy destroyed or damaged 8 battleships, killed over 2,400 Americans, and announced to the world that they were a force to be reckoned with. But the real terror came not from the ships lost, but from what appeared in the skies above. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero, officially designated the Type Zero carrier fighter, had entered service just 1 year earlier. American intelligence had heard whispers of a new Japanese fighter, but nothing prepared them for the reality. The Zero wasn't just good, it was revolutionary. Designed by Jiro Horikoshi, the Zero was built around a simple philosophy: sacrifice everything for performance. Weighing just 3,700 pounds empty, roughly half the weight of comparable fighters, it could climb faster, turn tighter, and fly farther than any other aircraft in the world. Its range of 1,900 miles meant it could escort bombers deep into enemy territory and still make it home. Its maneuverability was almost supernatural, capable of turning inside any opponent and delivering devastating fire from its 2 20mm cannons and 2 7.7mm machine guns. But the Zero's greatest advantage was also its most carefully guarded secret: weight reduction achieved through ruthless simplification. There was no armor plating to protect the pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks to prevent fire. The entire airframe was built from the lightest materials possible, with some sections so thin you could nearly punch through them with your fist. To American pilots encountering it for the first time, these vulnerabilities were invisible. All they saw was a fighter that could outclimb, outturn, and outrun anything they had. In dogfights over the Philippines, Wake Island, and the Dutch East Indies, the Zero massacred American and Allied aircraft. The kill ratio was devastating, often 10-to-1 in favor of the Japanese. American pilots developed a grim fatalism. The standard tactics they had trained for, tight-turning dogfights where skill and nerve determined the winner, were suicide against the Zero. Many tried anyway. Most didn't come back. Those who survived brought back terrifying reports. The Zero could turn so sharply it seemed to defy physics. It could climb almost vertically, and it always seemed to have more ammunition than should be possible. By mid-1942, American morale in the Pacific Air War had hit rock bottom. The question wasn't if they could beat the Zero. The question was whether they would survive long enough to try. In the corridors of power in Washington, panic was setting in. Every combat report painted the same picture. American fighters were obsolete, outclassed, and dying in droves. The Navy's F-4F Wildcat and the Army's P-40 Warhawk were brave machines, but bravery doesn't stop 20mm shells. Something had to change, and fast. The breakthrough came from the most unlikely place, a frozen bog in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. In June 1942, during Japan's diversionary attack on the Aleutians, a Zero pilot named Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga attempted to make an emergency landing after his plane took damage. The ground looked solid. It wasn't. The Zero flipped onto its back in the soft muskeg, killing Koga instantly. When American forces discovered the crashed Zero 5 weeks later, they realized they had stumbled upon a gift from the gods. The aircraft was almost completely intact. Within days, Navy engineers and intelligence officers descended on the wreck like surgeons around an operating table. They photographed every rivet, measured every dimension, and recorded every detail. Then they carefully disassembled it, shipped it to North Island Naval Air Station in San Diego, and proceeded to resurrect it. By September 1942, the captured Zero was flying again, this time with American markings and an American pilot at the controls. The hunt for weakness had begun. The test flights revealed everything. Commander Eddie R. Sanders took the restored Zero up again and again, pushing it to its limits, exploring every corner of its performance envelope. What he discovered was both impressive and damning. Yes, the Zero could turn impossibly tight. Yes, it could climb like a rocket. But above 200 knots, the controls became heavy and sluggish. In high-speed dives, the aircraft became nearly uncontrollable. The thin wings flexed and twisted, and pilots reported feeling like they were wrestling a living thing that wanted to tear itself apart. And that lack of armor? That became glaringly, fatally obvious. A few well-placed rounds from a .50 caliber machine gun would turn the Zero into a flying fireball. Armed with this intelligence, American tacticians immediately updated their combat manuals. New doctrine spread through the fleet. Never dogfight a Zero. Never try to turn with it. Instead, use speed and altitude. Dive on them, take one shot, and keep going. Use the superior diving speed and structural strength of American planes to engage and disengage at will. The Zero was a scalpel. Beautiful, precise, and deadly in close quarters. American fighters needed to become hammers. But even with better tactics, the F-4F Wildcat was still fundamentally outmatched. What the Navy needed wasn't better tactics. They needed a better plane. They needed something that could go toe-to-toe with the Zero and win. That plane was already being born in the factories of Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation on Long Island, New York. But its genesis had started earlier, in the desperate months after Pearl Harbor, when Grumman's engineers realized their current design, the F-6F Hellcat, needed to be completely rethought. The original Hellcat design, begun in 1940, was meant to be an evolution of the Wildcat, a bit faster, a bit stronger, but fundamentally similar. Then came the war and the horrifying reports from the Pacific. Grumman's chief engineer, Roy Grumman, and his team went back to the drawing board with a new mandate: build a fighter specifically designed to kill Zeros. They started with power. The Hellcat would use the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial power plant producing 2,000 horsepower, nearly twice what the Zero's engine could generate. This monster engine would give the Hellcat a top speed of 380 miles per hour and a climb rate of 3,500 feet per minute. It wouldn't turn as tight as a Zero, but it wouldn't need to. Then came protection. Grumman engineers added armor plating behind the pilot's seat and around the engine. They installed self-sealing fuel tanks that could take hits without exploding. The cockpit canopy was reinforced. Every vulnerable system was either protected or redundant. The Hellcat was being built to take punishment and keep fighting. But the most important innovation was firepower. While the Zero carried two 20mm cannons and two rifle-caliber machine guns, the Hellcat would mount 6 Browning M2 .50 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing. These were the same weapons that had proven devastatingly effective in American bombers. Each gun could fire 800 rounds per minute, and the .50 cal round was heavy enough to punch through aircraft structures, engines, and fuel tanks with ease. The mathematics were brutal and simple. In a typical burst, the Hellcat could pour 80 rounds per second into its target. If even a fraction of those rounds hit, the result was catastrophic. And unlike the Zero's 20mm cannons, which carried limited ammunition, the Hellcat's 6 .50 cals gave pilots 400 rounds per gun, enough for sustained combat. The data from the captured Zero influenced every design decision. Grumman engineers knew the Hellcat couldn't match the Zero's turning radius, so they ensured it could dive faster and climb steeper. They knew they couldn't make it as light, so they made it tough enough to absorb damage that would destroy a Zero. The Hellcat wasn't trying to outdance its opponent. It was designed to be a flying fortress that could chase down Zeros, absorb their fire, and hammer them into scrap metal. By June 1942, the prototype was ready for testing. The XF-6F1 prototype took to the skies over Bethpage, Long Island on June 26, 1942. Test pilot Robert Hall pushed the aircraft through its paces, and the results exceeded expectations. The Hellcat was fast, stable, and forgiving, exactly what combat pilots needed. But Grumman wasn't satisfied. They immediately swapped out the original Wright engine for the more powerful Pratt & Whitney R2800, creating the XX6F3. The transformation was dramatic. The new engine gave the Hellcat a power-to-weight ratio that could almost match the Zero's climb rate while maintaining superior speed at all altitudes. In mock combat against captured enemy aircraft, the Hellcat proved it could hold its own. The Navy was impressed but skeptical. They had been burned before by fighters that looked good on paper but failed in combat. The Hellcat needed to prove itself in the one arena that mattered, real combat in the Pacific. Production ramped up with extraordinary speed. By October 1942, Grumman was delivering operational Hellcats to Navy squadrons. By January 1943, VF-9 Squadron aboard the USS Essex became the first unit to receive the new fighter. The pilots approached their new mount with cautious optimism. It was bigger and heavier than the Wildcat, but it felt solid, powerful, ready. On August 31, 1943, the Hellcat would finally meet its destiny over the island of Marcus. The raid on Marcus Island was a test, a probe to see if the Hellcat was truly ready for the brutal air combat of the Pacific. As the F-6F fighters launched from the USS Essex and USS Yorktown, the pilots felt the difference immediately. The Hellcat accelerated like nothing they had flown before, climbing strongly toward the target. Then the radio crackled. "Bandits, 12 o'clock high, Zeros." This was it, the moment of truth. The Japanese fighters dove from altitude, confident in their proven superiority. The American pilots, following their new doctrine, didn't try the turn with them. Instead, they used the Hellcat's superior speed and power to choose the terms of engagement. The first Zero that attempted a traditional turning fight found itself surprised by the Hellcat's ability to maintain energy in turns. Where a Wildcat would have bled speed and become vulnerable, the Hellcat's massive engine kept it moving. When the Zero tried to break away and climb, the Hellcat stayed with it, its 650 calibers chattering death. The battle was short and decisive. The Hellcats downed several Zeros without a single loss. But this was just a skirmish, a small sample of what was to come. The real test would come in November 1943 during Operation Galvanic, the invasion of the Gilbert Islands, specifically the bloodbath known as Tarawa. The skies over Tarawa became a killing field. Japanese defenders launched wave after wave of aircraft to repel the American invasion, and the Hellcats met them head-on. Day after day, the air battles raged at altitudes from sea level to 20,000 feet. Zeros, Vals, and Bettys threw themselves at the American fleet, and the Hellcats tore through them like wolves through sheep. The pilots quickly discovered the Hellcats' true strength. It was fundamentally more survivable than anything they had flown before. Zeros that landed hits, and they still did, found their fire absorbed by armor or sealed fuel tanks. Pilots limped back to their carriers with holes in their wings and fuselage, damage that would have killed them in a Wildcat or destroyed a Zero outright, and their Hellcats kept flying. The tactics evolved rapidly. Hellcat pilots learned to use their superior speed to control the engagement. They would dive from altitude, make slashing attacks, and then zoom back up before the Zeros could react. If a Zero tried to follow them up, the Hellcat's climb rate meant it could maintain or extend separation. If the Zero tried to turn and run, the Hellcat could chase it down. By the end of November 1943, the kill ratio was becoming clear. The Hellcat was winning decisively. But the biggest tests were still ahead. June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea, west of the Mariana Islands. The largest carrier battle in history is about to begin, and it will be remembered as the moment American air superiority in the Pacific became absolute and undeniable. Japanese Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa has assembled 9 carriers and sent a massive strike force of over 400 aircraft toward the American fleet. His plan is audacious. Use the long range of his Zeros and bombers to strike the Americans before they can respond. Then use the Marianas Islands as refueling points for a sustained campaign. On paper, it's brilliant. In reality, he's sending his pilots into a meat grinder. The American fleet, commanded by Admiral Mark Mitcher, has assembled 15 carriers. On their decks sit over 400 Hellcats, their pilots rested, trained, and hungry. The new fighter direction procedures, using radar to vector fighters onto incoming raids, means the Japanese will face coordinated, concentrated interceptions. No more scattered duels. This will be systematic slaughter. At 10 a.m., radar picks up the first massive Japanese raid. Over 60 Zeros and bombers heading straight for Task Force 58. The order goes out, launch the fighters. Within minutes, over 200 Hellcats are airborne, climbing to intercept. The Japanese pilots, many of them inexperienced replacements for the veterans lost over the previous 2 years, don't know what's about to hit them. The massacre began at 10:36 a.m. The first Hellcat slammed into the Japanese formation like a hammer hitting glass. Zeros exploded under the weight of .50 caliber fire. Bombers, stripped of their fighter escorts, became sitting ducks. Japanese pilots who tried to engage the Hellcats found themselves outclimbed, outdove, and outgunned. One Hellcat pilot, Lieutenant Alex Vraciu, would later describe shooting down 6 Japanese aircraft in 8 minutes. His gun camera footage shows it clearly. Smooth, efficient, deadly. Target, fire, target, fire. The Hellcats weren't dogfighting, they were executing. Wave after wave of Japanese aircraft tried to break through to the American carriers. Wave after wave were destroyed. The ocean below filled with wreckage and parachutes. Of the 373 Japanese aircraft that launched that day, 243 were shot down. American losses? 29 aircraft. The pilots nicknamed it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. But the numbers only tell part of the story. What died in the Philippine Sea wasn't just Japanese aircraft, it was the myth of Japanese air superiority. The Zero, once feared and respected, had become prey. The hunters had become the hunted. And the instrument of that reversal, appearing again and again in combat reports, was always the same: the F-6F Hellcat. The skies had changed hands permanently. The statistics from the Hellcat's combat career tell a story of total dominance that is almost difficult to believe. By the time Japan surrendered in August 1945, Hellcats had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat while suffering only 270 losses. That's a kill ratio of 19-1, the highest of any fighter aircraft in history. But beyond the numbers lay the human reality. American pilots could finally take to the skies with confidence instead of dread. They had a machine that could protect them, that could absorb punishment, that gave them a fighting chance against any opponent. The psychological shift was enormous. Japanese pilots, conversely, found themselves in an impossible situation. The Zero was still the same aircraft that had dominated in 1942, but now it faced an opponent designed specifically to exploit its weaknesses. Worse, Japan couldn't replace the Zero with something better. Their industrial capacity was stretched to the breaking point, and their experienced pilots were dying faster than they could train replacements. By late 1944, encountering a Hellcat was essentially a death sentence for most Japanese pilots. The experienced aces had been killed. The replacements had minimal training. And the Hellcat just kept coming, in greater numbers, with better pilots, supported by superior tactics and technology. The verdict was in. The duel was over. The Hellcat had won. When the war ended on August 15, 1945, the Hellcat had become the most successful naval fighter in history. Grumman had produced 12,275 of them in just 3 years, an incredible feat of industrial production. They had equipped dozens of carrier squadrons, fought in every major Pacific campaign from 1943 onward, and fundamentally changed the nature of carrier warfare. The impact went beyond combat statistics. The Hellcat proved that thoughtful engineering, informed by intelligence and practical testing, could overcome even the most challenging opponent. The lessons learned from the captured Zero had been transformed into a weapon system that dominated its nemesis. American pragmatism had defeated Japanese artistry. For the pilots who flew it, the Hellcat inspired an affection rare in military aviation. They called it the aluminum tank for its toughness, praised its reliability, and credited it with bringing them home alive. Many considered it the finest carrier fighter of the entire war. The Zero, meanwhile, became a footnote, a cautionary tale about the dangers of over-specialization. Its early dominance had been built on sacrificing protection for performance. When it met an opponent designed to exploit that trade-off, the results were catastrophic. The hunter had indeed become the hunted, and the price was paid in fire and blood across the Pacific sky. Today, you can see Hellcats preserved in museums around the world, their paint faded, but their presence still commanding. Stand next to one and you understand immediately. This is not a delicate machine. This is a weapon built for war, heavy and purposeful, with 6 gun barrels bristling from wings thick enough to land on a carrier deck in a storm. The legacy of the Hellcat extends far beyond its combat record. It established principles of fighter design that remain relevant today. Survivability matters as much as performance. Firepower can compensate for maneuverability, and the best weapon is the one that brings the pilot home alive. Modern fighter design still reflects these lessons learned over the Pacific 8 decades ago. Perhaps most importantly, the Hellcat story reminds us that wars are won not by the side with the best initial weapons, but by the side that learns, adapts, and outthinks its opponent. The Japanese started with the superior fighter. America responded with superior intelligence, engineering, and doctrine. The result changed history. In the end, the Zero's reign lasted barely 2 years. The Hellcat's dominance lasted until jets made them both obsolete. But for that critical period, from 1943 to 1945, when the fate of the Pacific hung in the balance, there was no question which aircraft owned the sky. If this story of American ingenuity and determination moved you, share it with someone who appreciates how wars are won not just with weapons, but with wisdom. Hit subscribe to discover more hidden stories that changed the world. Every event, date, specification, and person in this documentary has been verified through historical and documented sources. And somewhere, in the quiet hangar of memory, a Hellcat pilot smiles, remembering the day the hunter finally became the hunted.